on. Let's go on. We have the last presentation before lunch in our section. We shall listen to Vadim Mustyatsa. Am I right? BDD by example, Russian fairy tale, 3 trips of Ilya Muromets at the Gherkin language. Well, my dears, it's the last presentation before lunch. Please come in. Before we begin, I have 5 questions to you, just for this presentation to become more or less useful. The first question is, who is ready to begin what he came here for? To listen, to try to understand? Everyone. Almost. All right. That is quite enough. Then I have the second question. Who knows or who thinks he knows what are user stories? Most of you. All right. Who knows what is behavior-driven development? Some of you, okay? And who knows what is Gherkin? Not a translation. It's not a cucumber of a certain type, but it's different. So some of you knows it's a language of programming. The last question is, who is Ilya Muromets? Everyone knows. At this point, I build my presentation. It's an educational one. It works, okay. So, in order to tell you about that, I have to find out what is a user story, what is BDD, and what is Gherkin. And do you want to know the answer to at least one of these questions? So it means that you are in the right place. It's not just a waste of time. It will be something useful to you. Let us go on. In order for me to tell you all about it, let us get acquainted, and you must trust me, because I may tell you some bullshit. I am Vadim Mustyatsa. I'm a coach of eye transition. You can see that you will go to LinkedIn. You can go there and see if I am truly who I am. I have certification from Scrum Alliance. Why I am qualified to talk to you? I do flexible development from 2012, and I moved from a more traditional company that worked according to the waterfall development scheme in Chisinau. I was born there in Moldova, and for 5 years I've been working in a company that developed waterfall things. I didn't like many things. I didn't like the result. Yes, we developed systems, but not those that we desired, not within budget, not within the time. And I didn't like it and decided to change the company, to change the approach, and I started working in Dplace. And I was part of Agile Moldova. I became part of Scrum Guides Moldova. I became a coach for other companies, and life became much more dynamic. In 2014, I moved to the city of Minsk, where I started working in iTransition, sometimes in IT Mine. I have some trainings and lectures, and I developed one of the initiatives about what we're talking today. It's important that I have been dealing with this question for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015, and I studied it deeply. I used it in practice, and I can tell you that I know what user stories are, not because I read it in Wikipedia, but because I used it, because I tried it in practice, and I'll tell you in detail about that. Why Ilya Muromets? In June this year, after the summer analytical workshop, I started arguing with Denis Beskov, well-known analysts. Uh, so we started talking whether a user story is a script technique. Denis said yes, it is, but paradoxically, it is not a script because it lacks a chain of events. It's just a set of claims. Who believes that this is a user story? I didn't raise my hand, so some people believe that, well, we can say so. We can say that a use case is also a user with some attributes, and we believe that we have a use case. No. A use case, if you know Alistair Cockburn, is a different thing, but it can be used with UML notation. They complement each other. Same with the user story. What you read here is just the initial step, which later must be used differently from what we usually do that. And Dennis once said, when I gave him the practical example, if you go to the left, you will lose your happiness. If you go right, you will lose your horse. It's not a script. It's an element of a control flow. Yes, this is not a script, but this is not a user story either in its behavioral part. And I like the metaphor. And I said, well, why not use it to explain to the people what it means? Let's take a misconception, turn it upside down, and see the right thing. I recalled two things. One is Kent Beck's book, which is quite famous. He started using the techniques which can be called flexible programming. And the second book, not the book itself, but, well, once I talked to one of the Java developers, and he said, you know, I read a lot of books, but when I read Spring in action, I saw an example when Craig Walls talked about using programming techniques through something quite wild. He talked about the round table knights looking for Saint Graal and how the minstrels describe each heroic deed of each knight. So in complexity grows, we add more and more entities when we use Spring to clarify the situation. And he made it all clear on the basis of that example. Well, it's very nice that you use fairy tale examples to explain what UML is. Our world has changed. IT moves on, develops, and scenarios are becoming more and more complex, and it's difficult to use simple examples. By simple examples, you can tell something about syntax or something else, but what about aspect-oriented programming? Trivial examples wouldn't work. Same about BDD, Gherkin, and so on. If you start using ATM metaphor, it wouldn't work. And the last example is 2015 is the year of literature in Russia, and fairy tales in Russia is literature. So I took this picture, I took this fairy tale. The fairy tale was put down in 1871. In 1872, this picture was made. You know what fairy tale is? It's something which is not written by a certain specific author. It was invented by somebody else, unknown, and we have to put it down. And there are some people who remember such fairy tales. They tell them in different versions. And I went to an interesting resource where all the versions are collected. For example, this one, Three Trips of Ilya Muromets, all the versions are collected there, and there are 7 versions. 7 versions is quite a lot. So initially we had one situation when you can use different circumstances and you can have 7 options, and the user story becomes different. And in order to complement all that, in open source we have a rule: if you have an idea, develop a repository, and you will have it all. And now let us look at the metaphor. We have a hero, Ilya, and the hero needs this fairy tale. He is a customer. Of course, this is not true, because fairy tales are developed within the human culture. But for example, we have a customer and a team that is going to turn this idea into practice. We have a product owner, a publisher, who is responsible for publishing it and selling it. And there are developers, which consist of a writer, developer, and editor, tester. It's clear. Who seems it's clear? So most of you, okay. So you mapped it to software development. And now let us look at the user story. It's a complex thing if you look in detail. The main idea that was developed in the year 2000, when in XP they started working like this. A story exists in 3 states. 3 states. Maybe 4, but we're talking about 3. The card, when it's just a card. A conversation, and the confirmation, when we fix something, but what we had previously on a map, we now have as a certain functionality. So first it's a scenario for testing, then test, then functionality of the operation system. Let me show you how a user story changes in the process of transition from one status to another. Who used user stories? Most of you, right? So let us compare. You have you realize what it means. Let us compare your perception with mine. I took part in a lot of projects, and let's begin from the beginning. When we build a card, at the very inception, this process can take place at any moment. Stories appear and disappear, they are accepted, they are rejected. For example, we have a 2-week iteration, a 2-week sprints. And more than 2 weeks before the next sprint, a new idea is born. Later, it will not live up to the sprint. We shall not have the time to work with this story. So let's take more than 2 weeks prior to the sprint. And the customer develops an idea. He saw a problem. How did the fairy tale appear? There were a lot of tales about Ilya Muromets, but there was no final fairy tale. We had a dozen, maybe more, of tales, but there was no conclusion. Someone had to conclude the story set, and somebody invented a complex version, and the behavior is rather complex here. For example, Ilya said 5 strings. This is a story card. The last, so I replaced function or feature in Gherkin in fairy tale. The last heroic deed of Ilya Muromets. We have to name our story. The last heroic deed of Ilya Muromets. Then narrative goes on. Narrative is mixed with the story. Actually, this is just a beginning. Who do we have? An old hero Ilya Muromets, what does he want? He wants to do his final bright heroic deed. Why? To become famous forever and ever and ever. So this user story is focused on changing the current situation. That is transition to something else. And usually transition means changing somebody's behavior. The person is an old one, which means that the hero lives on and on and on, but time will come when he's going to die, and in the end he has to put an exclamation mark. He says, I am old and I want to do something bright in the end, so that it would be fixed in a fairy tale for the people to remember me. For sure. For sure means changing of behavior, close to 100% change. If 40% change, no. This is not the goal. This is not the target. He wants a result close to 100%. So when we define the requirements, we must define them clearly. Then we can keep it, and it's not so important later, but we have to reach conversation. This is the first commit. We have a card. Then there is a big misconception that the customer who said that shouldn't be asked about the details, because if he tells us the details, that the details will become requirements and the requirements will change. This is not true. For example, in 90% of cases, you have some understanding about how to implement the idea. It's very rare that you have an idea and you don't know how to implement them. Usually people have an idea, people know what to do with that. Ilya realizes, I need a heroic deed, I have to defeat a great gang of gangsters, but rooks, without killing anyone. Usually it's about killing someone. That's the entry. He beheaded a monster and that's all. But actually, this is an interesting requirement. I have to score a tremendous victory without killing anyone. For example, I'm surrounded by a group of gangsters who want to rob me, to kill me, and I do not kill anyone. I just hit an oak tree. An oak tree is smashed into pieces. Everyone sees that and says, "Oh no, this is not the person."
Этот богатырь стреляет куда-то в дуб, и дуб из какой-то массивной...
And and then the oak tree gets disintegrated. So if we believe this folk story, so those people just got scared and they started to say, so we'll pay you, just don't kill us. So let us go, and there will be nice guys. We will cease to be bad guys. And so there's like in that folk folk story was saying, so leave us alone because we want just to have kids. So okay, so he won on them in a very good time. So he lets them go. He lets them go. He decided not to kill them. This is wonderful. Yeah. So although just they wanted to offer him money for that. So could it be the final feat that's kind of out of the common and can achieve this great goal? And I think that is very convincing. That's a good user story. And so we got this story. So, but it's just a card because we are during the first phase. So there's a customer, he's got an idea, he's got a vision, but it's just assumptions. The first assumption differs from the second one, but we need just to know where is it that where this idea came from. And although he knows what he wants to get, or he does know what he wants to get, he's got a clear idea of what kind of application he wants, then it's easier. And then we just came to standard situation. So if the customer, so he tells us what his requirements are. But we developed, but then we got a release, and then the release is not what the customer expected. So then the next stage, the next phase of the story is conversation, when we start to discuss what we developed. It's called as the meeting of the three guys. So the three guys met. So it's not three, it's four. Why is the meeting of three guys? It does mean that so they take a certain approach, and then so meeting of the three and the fourth one go. No, it's why. So it's only the three guys because they matter. Actually, it could be even up to five people, by five persons. But it should be representative. So the three main areas. So he is responsible for the product, for the technology, and the guy who is responsible for the system, who takes care of the system. Because many they can talk to each other and they can explain to each other what exactly they want, because they know the system, this new product, from different angles. And this is very important because now they can have QAs start telling us how the system behaves. The analyst does not understand it very well. So if there's a customer with his story, so then there is this editor, and as the head of the product and the chief editor, and then someone, for example, there's a writer, and then Elijah, the fourth one. So they need to get together and discuss this, because but if these two people don't understand each other, so then you lose some of the information and functionality that can get to those who are going to develop this project, to accomplish this project. So that's why getting together for these four people is very important, because now they will be able to deliver, to convey them a message as to what kind of product they want to get. Then another thing. So for example, the story. So let's see that this three friends meet. So the first thing happens. So they evaluate this story. So then, from the viewpoint that it's a good story, right? Then the story is criticized, and because because there is an editor who published folk stories, and he does not believe that 1 feet is enough. Then there are editors who agree with him. So let's do something else. This is not enough. Then there are writers who say, yeah, so we can implement it. Yeah, not one scenario, but three scenarios. Because a folk show, that's the way it was. So it was Elijah and the bandits, and then they discuss why let's expand it. Let's expand it. And but three trips together of Elijah. This is quite possible. hmm And so they don't actually discuss the details of the implementation. They just check it. So they try just to make sure that they're on the same page, that they so that they're on the same wave, understand each other, and that's when they can go further. And then grooming. So if then three meet four to so then during these 2 weeks we meet on a certain day and see the story. So by more people just participate. So it's 70% of the team participate already. So it's not just the meeting of the three; it's 70% of the team. So we finish the scenarios, we complete the scenarios, and then eventually so we get so that's this fully fledged story, this folk story from beginning and the end. So three trips of Elijah with certain reservations. So this story is ready. The story is ready now. Everyone agrees. We polished it off, ironed it out, and now just we do the planning. So the main mistake of planning, they just take. So we haven't looked at it, and now just let's go into detail about the story. And then it lasts for 4 hours. People are unhappy, so they look at it from different angles. They don't like it. So, but they need just to be ready for that story. And then you have this. The story should be ready for them, finally polished. So there may be some details that we could have overlooked earlier. And then we checked it again, read it, went over it. Let's talk about the three roads, for example. So the inscription of etched in stone, this on that stone, that Elijah just sitting on his horse is reading, etc. and then is to make sure that he follows this road where he is to be killed, or he follows this road, and in order to lose his horse, and then or if he follows the third road, so you'll get married. And so, but to get married is too early, it's too late, because I'm an old guy, I don't want to marry again. So he wants to be killed, etc. So the story eventually becomes very good, saturated, interesting, exciting, ready for development. This is a user story already. That's already what we call a user story. Now implementation, realization. Then the whole team participates. The whole team participates. So the customer answers his questions, and so then the editor is there, writer is there, all so. And thus, unfortunately, sometimes they don't let the customer in until the last moment. This is wrong. So the customer should be so at all these stages present. And then eventually, so there was this episode with the beautiful girl who tries to love her, and actually just he. So then this is so something wrong with this girl, because she tries to entice him, attract him, and so he comes in, and then she puts him in a trap, tries to lock the door, and then he breaks the door, comes out, so grabs the girl and just lets her go. So let her die, for example, that he doesn't kill her. So then there's a version of the folk story when she falls, and gets herself killed and dies. And so there are different stories, different approaches. But anyway, so we need just to take into consideration all options, all possibilities, and so polish the final story. And then there's this demonstration that the user story is there. So the writers wrote it, the editors checked it, so the customer now looks at it, what happened, whether they like it or not, and so there are no. They say that this is exactly what I need, because they know. So, but for example, there's a problem with the names of the roads. So then the numbers of the road is not good. The names of the roads are not good. So let's just say, so this direction, this direction, this direction. Okay, small things that we polish, and then we do the testing, adaptation and testing. So so we give the folk show to the people to read, so then they. So unfortunately, so then the names of the road, so 40% of the people did not like the roads numbered. So it's better just to put it, so for example, left, right, forward. So much better than numbers. Then we added, so then when Elijah turns into stone, so not good. They decided to remove it. So then there are some folk shows of the West. So then cool guys turn into stone, and then they come back into the world when they need to be returned back to the world. So our mentality is different. The most popular version is based that Elijah finds under the cross a big treasure, then goes to the monastery, and so then builds a monastery and stays in this monastery or church. So then there's Saint Elijah of Pechora, and they compare Elijah with the guy who built the church and then decided to turn into a monk and stay there and serve God. And so then this conversation, the last stage. So there is no story anymore. We changed it. We changed the story. The story exists as long as we don't get a feedback, and then the story turns into a feature. And then we work with this functionality, we polish it off, the new stories appear. So the story can change only once line, as you can compare it, slight change, some insertions, because the user story scenario is different, because the story is communication and planning. Feature file and Gherkin. Gherkin is the more advanced approach with the specification and the testing and documentation, etc. So it's a more complicated subject. You can read more about that. And eventually, so we have this product. So we wrote several folk stories, and so the project is over. We got the product, and I wish everyone would get it. Now go back to reality. Let's put our feet on the ground. October, it's cold, and so the trees are barren. So this picture not far from my house. So then even now at times we can see these big rocks. Oh, it's a rock. It's a moment of choice. Elijah comes to the crossing, and he made a choice, and this his fate depends on that. So having listened to this presentation, I hope that you make a selection. So after you have having listened to my presentation, you're beginning just to look for different solutions, and I hope that you will make the right decision. So there are always two ways. So first is this repository, three trips, repository on HeadCub. Yes, it's open. You can find there is this commitment uh, log. So that's everything just is broken down by it. And there are weeks, so where each stage just is described. So every commit compares to the page in the wiki, and you can always read it. I try to describe it so very carefully. And the second is more practical. So we have this open project within the framework of this initiative, and it's called missioner by. So there is a repository as well. You can access it, and so there are already features there. So for people, for their requirements, they look like this. And so this is not a metaphor. This is something realistic. And so you can always so there are contacts you can access. So add to Slack, and so I can add you. So collaborators on GitHub, so I can add you, and then you can participate more actively. So this is it. So move forward. That's it. That's the point. Now I can answer your questions. Are you shocked? Yeah. No questions. Okay. So there will be questions, I'm sure, if you access to GitHub, and you will be interested, I'm sure. It's very well described, so you can leave your comments to any code. You can check in weeks. You can write me, so whatever you want, so you can do that. Very easy, straightforward. So no context. So very straightforward. So you can just so it depends. I will not be able to answer, but I'm different. So I describe the situation from A to Z, and you know the context. So then it doesn't say it depends. I will take you from A to Z, all the way down the road, how it reflects in the real systems, how it turns into auto tests, specifications, documentations, etc. I'm sure that you will be able to meet on the internet. Thank you for not leaving. Thank you.